Alright, this is the finished product of what this project is going to be about. So we have a sports related foreground here with an aggressive effect to it with some like shattering stuff going on, and we have a nice little background that we've created. So this is the example of what we're going to be working towards, and to get started I'm just going to go ahead and delete a bunch of layers. I've already removed a few. Let me go ahead and get rid of this effect here. Delete these. And get rid of that. Alright, so one thing that I did do is I'm going to retain this because it's a lot of work to get to this point. So I have one extra layer in here that you don't have. This should be what you have, and let me just return these to the original opacity and blend mode here. Alright, so your project should look something like this when you open it. So we have a logo here for Kansas City. I'm going to go ahead and hide that. Actually, this has a white background to it that I have removed. So let me see if that's in here somewhere. It is. Go ahead and delete this layer mask. Then we're going to save this. Close that. Alright, so it should look like this. So we have this logo, which may be a little bit smaller than this. I stretched it out. And then we have this grunge layer, same thing. It may be a little bit smaller than the work area. I stretched that out. And then we have our background image. So the first step, you can go ahead and hide all those other layers there. And the first objective is to select Mahomes as a foreground here. And then we're going to adjust some colors and then go from there. So using the quick select tool, you're going to be selecting just Mahomes as a foreground, and there's a lot of little sections here that you'll have like portions of his body and then the background in between. For instance, this little hole here. So this should not be selected in your selection. So to remove or deselect something, once you've selected all this stuff, and I don't want to select this because this is background, you would hold down the Alt key, which if you can see up here, it toggles it to remove from selection. So if I release the Alt key, it goes back to add to selection. So the Alt key is what you can use to toggle back and forth between add and subtract from selection. So if I'm in add to selection mode, I would want to hold the Alt key down and then drag and paint this area here. I'm staying within the edges, and as I release, Photoshop's going to try to find the edge. So it's kind of a paint a little bit and then release your mouse to allow Photoshop to detect the edge, and then it'll kind of clean it up for you. And the smaller the area that you're trying to focus on, the smaller your brush size needs to be. So to get really close in here, you may want to adjust your brush size even smaller. And then zoom in, kind of focus on this area. And this is removing from selection still. So release the mouse click, and Photoshop's going to get the most of that removed from the selection. So again, I'm just teaching you the concepts, and then just try your best. But for this exercise, I'm going to move fairly quickly through this because I've already done this step. So let's just say I know I haven't selected all of Mahomes, but let's just say that I have most of it done. The next step would be to now create a mask to hide the background. First thing I wanted to do actually was duplicate the background. So let me undo one step. And I can just, instead of doing Control J at this point, which would duplicate just these pixels, I want to duplicate the layer, so I have to right click, duplicate layer. So this is my background layer copied. I still have this selection going on, so now I can click to add a mask. So I can retain my background layer. As much as possible, we're going to do this non-destructively, which means we're going to retain everything in case we need to go back and redo something. So I'm going to hide my background to show what I have masked out here. So when you're done, you should have the complete Mahomes. I did it really quickly, so I have a bunch of holes here. I did that on purpose so I can show you a technique to fix your work after you've created a mask. So let's say I needed to remove from this mask. So I have this real large section of background here that is red. So I need to remove this now from this mask. So anything that is white is visible, anything that is black is hidden. So to hide this, I need to paint it with black. In order to do that more cleanly, I'm going to actually use a selection tool to select this and then fill it with the color black. So to select it, I'm going to use the lasso tool. So the lasso tool, I could have used this same tool in the selection process, but I didn't do that, so now I need to, hide something in the mask, but it's a similar technique. So what I want to do is select this portion here, and I'm going to try to follow along the edge of the arm. And my hand is not super steady, but it's going to do a fairly decent job. So I have that portion now selected, and what I want to do is remove this so it's hidden in the mask. So I need to actually fill this with black. So I'm going to choose Edit from the top and go down to Fill, choose Black from the menu, and then click OK. You want to make sure that you're on the mask. I don't want to fill the actual picture with black. That's not going to do me any good. I want to fill the mask with black with what I have selected here. So what I could do is, if I need to remove more, that would be selecting more and then going back to Edit, Fill, Black. And the opposite would be true if I need to add some more of Mahomes somewhere. So I'm missing quite a bit. Let's just choose, I'll go ahead and just do the head since that's the part that I need there. So in order to select more, I'm going to need to temporarily disable the mask to reveal more pixels. So I'm not going to delete the layer mask, I'm just going to disable it for a moment here. So I need most of this head here selected. So I'm going to use my quick select tool. Just drag to select. Alright, and I want the mask, the face mask here. You can see there's some sections of the mask that I want to remove the background from. So this is an example of a mediocre versus a really good selection. So a really good selection would follow the outline. That's pretty close enough for me to show you what I mean here. So these sections here actually should not be visible. So these little, I'm going to punch some holes in here by Alt and then painting in this section here to remove from my selection. Again, I'm just doing this really quickly and not super accurately, but that's what I'd like you to do, is take your time and actually do a really decent selection. So I'm just removing any background that shouldn't be there, even in these little voids here. Alright, that's good enough for now. So this is stuff that I want to now be visible in my mask, so it needs to be filled with white when I re-enable my layer mask. So I have this portion of the head selected, and I need to fill this with white. So I'm going to go to Edit, make sure that I'm still on the mask over here, Edit, Fill, choose white this time. Okay, and there you go. So that's the reason why we use a mask instead of just deleting the background after you have the foreground selected, because using this method is non-destructive. Again, that's a better method to use. So you can go back in, and if you made a mistake, or you want to add or remove pixels from visibility, then you can use the mask to do that. So I already did the work and have a layer here that I've finished, which is this one here. And I actually shifted it over and made it centered. So if you'd like to do that as well, you can do that. So I'll just hide this for a second. Deselect. So this is slightly off center. So you can use the move tool to just kind of jog it over towards the center. And then yours will match pretty much what I have here. Alright, my mask is in a smart, this is a smart object. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and move this over real quickly. Oh, cancel. So you can see my mask here. So this should look like what you've got. And for some reason mine shifted down. So let me just go ahead and move this back up towards the center. There we go. Now we should be on the same page. Your project should look very similar to mine. Same number of layers, and you've got this mask for the background that we copied. I'm going to go ahead and take the time to name this Mahomes. Alright, so the first thing we want to do is do a little bit of color correction for this. For that, we're going to use the curves adjustment layer. And we're going to choose with the eyedropper here to set the white point. This is going to be a simple color correction. I'm going to choose this spot on the forehead of the helmet here to be my white reference. So if I choose something different, I'll get a different result. So I'm looking for different things that are white to see what might be the best representation of what white should be. I tend to like the front of the helmet the most. So that is just a quick color correction. So anything that wasn't, I'm basically telling Photoshop this white should have been pure white, and if it isn't, adjust all the colors that need to be adjusted in order to get it to be white, which is also going to adjust the rest of the image to be more accurate. So from this point, I could adjust the black value to push more dark shades to pure black, and as I do that, it's also adjusting the midtones to be darker. So I just want a little bit more of a dark, aggressive looking image here. And then if you want to, you could just bump the whites up just a little bit for contrast. You don't need to do it very much. And then the overall image, if it was still too bright, you could grab the curve and adjust the midtones down to get it to be what you want it to be. So about right there looks good to me. So that's a color correction. And then to make my work area a little bit cleaner, since I've done this color correction and I'm not going to use any other image with that color correction, I'm just going to combine these two layers together into a smart object. So I'm going to go ahead and use my Shift key and select both layers, and then right click and choose Convert to Smart Object. So that condenses two layers into basically one project. And I can go in to edit those layers if I ever needed to by double clicking the icon for the layer. It's going to bring up this warning that says you need to save the file after you make the changes in order to change this. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK, and it's going to open up that smart object contents. So these are the two layers that were in that smart object. It opened in a new tab called Curves 1. So I'm going to now, let's just give you an example. Let me just change the settings drastically. So I'll go back into the curve settings here and just ramp it all the way up. Oh. There we go. That looks great. And then I'm going to go to File and Save, saving the contents of the smart object. And then I'm going to close this tab. And now you can see this is the project I was working on, and it changed my image. So that's how you edit the contents of a smart object. Just double click the icon. It will open up in a new tab, make your adjustments, save it, and then it will save to the project that you're working on. So I'm going to go ahead and undo that step. Alright, so the next thing we want to do is we're going to apply kind of an aggressive sharpening technique using the high filter. The high pass filter is found in the filter tab, but before we want to do that, we're going to be applying this to a duplicate layer. So I want to duplicate this layer. I can do Control J. Actually, before that, let's go ahead and name this Mahomes. And then I'm going to Control J to duplicate. And I'm going to go ahead and rename this high pass filter. And then I'm going to apply the filter. So I'll select that layer that's on top, go to Filter, scroll down to Other, and then choose high pass. Now I don't know why they hid it in this menu. It's a fairly common effect that people use, but this is an older version of Photoshop, and maybe it wasn't very popular when in those years. So, but this is where you find it. So Filter, Other, High Pass. So what this does is it looks according to the radius of pixels. The lower the value, the more detail or smaller details it's going to emphasize. So with a pixel of about 1, you can see some really fine detail. And let me go ahead and move this preview thing up to the face where there's more detail. So at 1 pixel, it's kind of emphasizing the lines of the eyes. If I turn that up some more, start to see some like hair features, some finer details. So the farther up you go, the more it's going to emphasize chunks of color. So now it's really blocky. So it's applying a sharpening effect to smoother surfaces. The higher the value, the more it's going to sharpen smooth surfaces. And if you turn it up too high, it actually starts to reverse the effect. So you don't want to go too far. And actually, this is probably better to do just try a value. So I'm going to set this one up to about 30. This is going to really sharpen a lot of the surfacey areas. I'm going to click OK. And this is not the actual result that you want, even though it is somewhat of an effect. We're going to use this as an overlay. So I'm going to change the blend mode from normal to overlay. And now you can see this effect. If I hide it, you see it really changes the look of the image. Let me zoom in real quick here. Like the skin, you can see there's an emphasis on different tones. And on the wristband, you can really see some things pop out. So it starts to look kind of cartoonish, but in a kind of aggressive, sporty way, which is what we're going for. So if I wanted to, I could adjust this. Because this was a smart object when we started, it's applied what's called a smart filter. So it's not a permanent adjustment, it's not destructive. You can go in and adjust this again if you don't like the values. Or what I could do with this is create a duplicate. So I'm going to go Control J. So that's overlaying an overlay, which is going to increase, basically double the effect. Zoom out a little bit. So I'm going to turn off the top overlay and see how it just increases the effect. So if you like the effect and you want more, you could add more layers by duplicating it. Or if you want a layer that's going to emphasize more fine details, you could use one of these and change the pixel value to something smaller. Something like a 4 to something between 4 and 6. Let's do 5, something right there. And then I'm going to zoom in on the face just to see what the difference is here. So you get finer detail that's emphasized with this first one. I'm going to change the order and see if that does anything. So because these are overlay, it's a subtle effect, but it has a really dramatic result. So I'm going to turn off the top one and turn it back on. And you can see where the finer details are emphasized with this one. And then with the bottom one, you can see where larger chunks of color are being sharpened. So again, if you wanted more of one or the other, you could just duplicate that layer to apply a greater effect. I like how that looks there. So these are all the high pass filters. If you wanted to, at this point, since you're not going to be adjusting these again, you could select all of these and make a smart object out of this. hopefully that won't break the computer. There we go. So basically I have a project within a project within a project. So that's the beauty of smart objects, is you can use them to basically condense your project so it's a little bit neater. So I can go back in and rename this Mahomes again. So I have my foreground ready to where I want it to be. So I'm going to focus on the background for a little bit. So first thing I want to do is create just a plain black background. So for that I need to add a layer. So I want to go to Layer, New, Layer, and I can name this Black Background. And it's just a transparent background. Now a quicker way to do this would be to just click on this button at the bottom. To the left of the trash can is a new layer button. So with one click I can add a new layer. So whichever method you want to use, you could, one is quicker and the other one may be a little easier to remember. So we've named this black background, but it's transparent. So we need to fill this layer with a color. So I'm going to go to Edit, Fill. I want to fill this with black. Click OK. Now this is going to be my background, so I'm going to move that to the bottom. And now I want to add another blank layer. So I'm going to go to this layer button. This layer 2 is going to be the red vignette. Now a vignette is basically, it creates a border that fades to a darker color usually. So it draws your eye inward, and you can create that with any shape that you want to. It can follow the rectangle shape of your image, or in this case we're going to use an oval shape or an ellipse. So to do that we're going to go to, make sure that first we're going to fill this with red. So go to Edit, Fill, and from the drop menu you're going to choose Color, which will open a new window. And I'm going to choose a nice dark red. Let's see, something like that. And now I'm going to use the elliptical marquee tool to create an oval shape. As I'm creating the shape, if you want to adjust it on the fly as you're creating it, you can use the space bar to move around your selection. Or if space bar doesn't work for you, which it doesn't for some people, once you've created your oval, you can go in and move it after you've created it. If you're not able to move it, or you've moved on, you want to make it larger, you can go to Select and Modify, or actually Transform Selection is what you want. That will allow you to increase the size of your selection and reposition it. So basically we're going for an oval shape that fits centered in the rectangle of your project area. Click the check mark. So we're going to use this selection to create our vignette. So we need to refine the edge of this selection. So you can either do that here, or you can go up to Select and choose Refine Edge. What I want to do is add a feather to the edge, and quite a bit of a feather. About 250 if you can get there. Maybe a little bit more. We'll try 250 and see what that looks like. So the values might be a little bit different if your oval is smaller or larger than mine. So, but this is about what we're looking for here as far as the feather. Click OK. And that did modify our selection even though it's not visible. This is not a hard line, it is a very soft line where 100% may be selected towards the center, then it fades out to 0% selected. So now what we're going to do is add a mask to this layer using the selection. And now we've created a vignette. So at this point, if you like what this looks like, you could leave it there. If you want to change it, you could reduce the opacity if you want to make it a little bit darker. And so that's one part of this. And we have two other layers here that we're going to incorporate into this effect. So the next one we're focusing on is the grunge layer. And this is a texture, and yours may be a little bit smaller, so what you want to do is you can use, if you don't have this resizing handles, when you go to the move tool, you can choose, let me go to the move tool here, don't apply. So I have this layer selected, I'm on the move tool, and I have this checkbox enabled that says show transform controls, which are these resizing handles, and if you scroll outside a corner you get the rotation option. So I like to leave that enabled so that anytime I select a layer and go to the move tool I can resize it. Otherwise, if you don't have that checked, you'll need to go to edit and then either free transform or choose a transform for scale or rotate or whatever you're trying to change about your layer. So it can save a lot of time if you just keep this check mark checked. So go ahead and resize this to fit the window of our project. And then click the check mark to accept that change. And what we're going to use this for is an overlay. So I'm going to move this underneath the Mahomes layer. And I'm going to change the blend mode. I'm just going to start with darken and see what that looks like. And what you can do is you can either just randomly choose one and see what it looks like. But a lot of times what I like to do is just click on it once until it's highlighted in this light blue. That indicates that that's kind of actively selected. And then you can toggle through options with your down and up arrows to just go through the list of blend options and just to see which one you like. This is totally up to you. So the overlay is a good option. I also saw some other ones that I liked. So you get to the end of the list, which is luminosity. So I'm going to go back up towards the top because there's a few up there that I liked. So there's overlay, which is nice. But I liked some of these other ones that were towards the top. Maybe that one, linear burn, color burn, multiply. So I like multiply, color burn, and linear burn as well. So I could try one of these. I think I'll leave it on color burn. If you like something different, go ahead and use that. It doesn't have to look exactly the same as mine. So once you get that the way you want it, you could from that you could either change the opacity if it's too bright or too dark. Or you could invert the color scheme. If this is a smart object, you'll have to rasterize it. I can't remember if it is or isn't. So let me just go ahead and make it a smart object. So if it has this little icon, that means it's a smart object and you can't modify any of the pixels in it. So to undo the smart object, you need to rasterize it. So go ahead and rasterize layer. And now I can use a little technique called inverting, which will swap the dark for the lighter shades. So whatever is dark will become light, whatever is light will become dark. And the easiest way to do that is with the shortcut Control I for invert. If you don't remember that shortcut, you can always go to Image, Adjustments, and choose Invert, and you can see that the Control I is the shortcut for invert. Inverting things is a common thing that you'll do in Photoshop, so I'd recommend just committing that to memory, Control I to invert. So with that layer selected, I'm going to do Control I. So everything that was dark is now light, and everything that was light is now dark. So this may be a different option if you prefer a darker look, and then you can choose a different overlay mode to fit that background. It just depends on what you're looking for. See, that doesn't look bad either. So I'm going to leave it like that. So the next element to add is the Kansas City logo. And I'm going to go ahead and just move that underneath the Mahomes layer. And I think this one is actually smaller as well, so I'll shrink this down so it looks more like your project. So this one we'll want to use a different blend mode as well. And if you do that now, any of the lightning ones, actually I need to accept those changes there. So the blend modes don't really work because there's white background where we don't want to see white background. So what we want to do first is isolate the actual logo and hide the white background. I'm going to hide Mahomes for a second, and then I'm going to go ahead and change this back to normal. And then I'm going to actually solo this layer by alt-clicking the eyeball. So hold down the Alt key, click on the eyeball. So it just hides everything else just temporarily. And now I'm going to use a selection tool to select the white in the background. And you could either, the long way to do this would be to use the quick select tool, and just select everything in the logo and try not to select the background. But one of the tools that we don't use frequently but is another smart selection tool is the magic wand tool. So we have the quick select tool and the magic wand tool. The quick select tool finds edges. The magic wand tool will find chunks of color. So what we have here is a big chunk of white that we want to select. So instead of trying to select the foreground, I'm going to use the magic wand tool to select the background. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the magic wand tool, and I want to get rid of this selection, so I'm going to go to select, deselect to start over. I'm going to click on the white background and see what happens. So already you see the magic wand did a really good job of selecting just the background and finding the edge of the logo that I want to retain. Now if yours didn't do as good a job, you may want to adjust the tolerance to a smaller number. If I had a larger setting here, say like 35, so it's selecting chunks of the logo, which is not good. So you'll want to adjust your tolerance. Mine was set to 10. And let me try something smaller than that, like 5. See what happens. Yeah, so you want something smaller. So 5 was fine. 10 also did a good job. So now we have what the background selected. So what we want to do, if I were to hit the mask now, it would actually hide the logo, which is not what I want to do. So I need to select the inverse first. So I want to go to the Select tab, choose Inverse. Now the actual logo is selected, and I can use the mask to hide the background. So now I'll just go ahead and alt click the eyeball again to reveal the other layers of the background. And you can see that it did a pretty good job. There's this section here along the edge that's actually like a shadow. So it's darker than pure white, but it isn't quite white. So it remains there. So if that were to bother you, it kind of bothers me, but I'm not going to take the time to select that and remove it at this point. It's good enough. Alright, so there's a little white artifact here, a portion of the background that didn't get removed, and that happens frequently. I'm not sure why, but it's easy to fix because this is a mask. So we need to paint with black to remove that line. So I'm going to go to the brush tool here. Actually, I could just make a rectangular selection here. So I'm going to go here and select that. And then I want to fill this. Make sure you're on the mask. Go to Edit, Fill, and fill that with black to remove that line. And if you wanted to, you could go ahead and do the other side. I'm not going to at this point. Deselect. Alright, so now I'm going to go ahead and enable the Mahomes so we can see what this looks like. And what I want to do is probably increase the size of this layer so you can see a little bit more of it. And reposition it in the center here. And then we're going to change the blend mode just to see what that looks like. Again, it's just to taste your preference, whichever one that you like the best. So you can just kind of toggle through them to see what they look like. Find one that you like. Kind of like maybe color dodge. Maybe it's a little too bright, so what I could do is change the opacity. So again, it's just your preference. I'm not finding something that I love, but I like this color dodge. So that looks good enough to me. So this red vignette looks a little bit light to me, so I'm going to go ahead, dark. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust the opacity back up to maybe 100%. So again, this is all your preferences. For this purpose, we're just going to call this good. So the next step would be that shatter effect that you saw in the original when I started the finished product. So to do that, we're going to have to duplicate our Mahomes. So I'm going to Control J. And this one I'm going to, you can just keep it Mahomes copy is fine. But this one will need to be rasterized because we're going to use liquify, and liquify is a destructive method, so if it's a smart object, it won't give you the option to do liquify. So if you go to filter, liquify is not available. So first thing you want to do is rasterize the layer. And what we're going to do is liquify this, so go to filter and then find liquify and click on that. It's going to load it up in a new window. And what we're going to do is just stretch this out horizontally. So we're going to pull the pixels away. I'm going to try to focus on just the perimeter and not grab anything out of the center. I'm going fairly quickly through this. So I don't want to grab the face. Just trying to grab the helmet, so I might want to adjust my brush size smaller just to get some of the color of the helmet out without distorting the face very much. It's okay if you grab a little bit of the face, just not all the skin tones. This may seem strange now, but it'll all make sense in a little bit. Go ahead on this side and grab some. We're just exploding the pixels out. The more you have, like, the farther away you stretch it, the farther out the exploding can happen. So if you're not interested in exploding very far, you don't have to stretch it out this far. But I just want to have more than enough to work with here, so I'm just pulling out a bunch of this. There we go. All right, then click OK. May take a while to load, just like mine is. All right, so we have this liquefied version of Mahomes and then the original one. I'm going to hide the liquefied one for now. And the next part of this, I'm just going to focus on Mahomes, and I want to just eliminate the backgrounds except for the black one. That's going to help you see the technique I'm using here. So what we're going to do next is focus on the brush tool. So over on the left hand side, there's several things that look like brush tools, but there's only one real brush tool. Kind of the quick select tool looks like a brush tool. Then there's the brush tool, and then there's the history. What's this called? History brush tool. So make sure you're on the actual brush tool, and then we're going to go into the properties for the brushes. So you can get there by clicking on the folder at the top, and I already have loaded some brush presets, so I'm going to take you through the step to do that. So in the brush presets tab, there's a menu over to the far right, and what we've done is added some new brushes to the special effects brushes. So I already have those brushes selected. I'm going to go ahead and load them again. Click OK. Now I'm going to load some new brushes into that. So I've changed my brush options. These are the special effect brushes, and I want to add some more brushes to that. So I need to go to the preset manager. These are my current brushes, and I want to load some new brushes into that. So this is where you'll need to get the files from the Google Classroom. I've already downloaded them. So again, that'd be, let's see if I can find that real quickly. There's two zipped folders that you'll want to download. One of them is glass shards type of brushes. So the broken glass, which is my favorite. So if you're going to download one, that's the one to get. The other one is particles, kind of like dust. So That would be the second folder. These download as zipped folders that you need to unzip. So the second step in this would be you can easily get those folders. They'll be in your downloads folder, but if you want to navigate there quickly, you can click on this up arrow and click on show in folder. That'll bring up the file browser. And then at this point, you could either unzip this folder in the current folder, or you could move it, like say to your desktop, or somewhere where if you're saving brush files, you could save it wherever you want to save it. But the next step is important. You need to unzip the contents of the folder. So to do that, you're going to right click and choose extract all. It's going to ask you where you want to save it, and if you want to name the folder the same name. Usually, yes, you do. So this is going to go ahead and unzip it in the current folder, which would be the downloads folder, and it's going to have the same name as the zipped folder. Then you click extract. You don't necessarily need to see the contents after you're done unzipping it, so you could uncheck this box and then click extract. I've already done that step, so I'm going to cancel. So once you've done that, then you can find the folder and load it into Photoshop, which will be the next step. So in Photoshop, we have clicked the button to load. Now we need to navigate to that folder that we unzipped. I put mine on the desktop. So I have this free broken glass folder. Double click, and this is the file that you need to load in. So once you find that, double click it. It's going to load those new brushes in there. So I'm going to do that again for the dispersion brushes. If I can find them here. There we go, 20 dispersion brushes. Alright, then you're done. So click done. And now those brushes are available towards the bottom of this list, and they have large numbers. They're named like 2,549, for example. Alright, so these are the brushes that we're going to use. And if you scroll over your image, you'll see that you're not able to paint anything. It's because you may be on a hidden layer, but now I'm on the Mahomes layer. I still can't paint because this is a smart object, and you can't modify the pixels of a smart object, which is good. We really don't want to paint on this. What we want to do is create a mask that we're going to paint on that. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the mask icon to create just a layer mask, and everything is white, so everything is visible. And if I scroll over now with my brush, I can see the pattern of the glass shards. And the size of this is really large. So there's a few different things you could adjust on this. As we use this tool, I'll show you that in just a second. So first thing you want to do is make sure that you're on the mask. That'll enable you to paint on it. And we're going to make sure that you're painting with black, which is going to hide pixels. So if I paint with this brush, it's going to take chunks out of Mahomes here. So let me just pick a spot. I'm just going to use the perimeter here, so the pieces are just coming off of the outside edge of the image. I'm going to click here first. See those chunks are coming off there. Now these are larger chunks, and larger chunks are going to be easy to distinguish a pattern and a shape. So if I click here again, it starts to look really uniform, like all of these shapes are all the same. So to vary that, I'm going to go back a few steps to make sure that the pattern isn't recognizable. I'm going to adjust the angle of my brush. So the preferences should be over here on the right. If not, you can open that again by clicking on this folder icon. And you can change the angle by grabbing this thing here and rotating it. So that will rotate your brush to a different section of shards that you can use. That way you don't get a real distinguishable pattern, just kind of random. So I'm using this to get the larger pieces. I'm going to go back and do some smaller pieces. Alright, so to get smaller pieces, I'm going to go ahead and just change my brush to something different. Let's see, let's try this one here. I'm going to change the brush size to something smaller. That's too small there. Something like that, and then rotate it around to get the little pieces that I want here. Just taking small chunks out. I really like that section of the brush, so I'm going to rotate it pretty much 180 degrees. Use that over here. Alright, so that's looking pretty good. Do the helmet a little bit. Alright, so you get the technique there. Yours is probably going to look a little bit different, but again, vary the size of the brush and the actual brush. If you want to just use different brushes for every time you click, you could do that. And then vary the angle of the brush to get a non-uniform pattern, just kind of a random, just chunks that are coming out here. So for the next part of this, we're going to be adding shards that are out here along the perimeter of the image, like they flew off Mahomes and now they're floating out in space. So we're going to enable the liquefied version of Mahomes, and we're going to create a mask for this layer. But this time, instead of having it be white to start with, we want it to start with black, which would mean everything will be hidden from sight. So in order to go from a white mask to a black one, you could do the simple shortcut of Control-I for invert. If you happen to forget that, you could fill this with black. So you go to Edit, Fill with black. So it would fill the entire window with black. Or you could go to Image, Adjustments, and find Invert from the list there. So whatever method you want to use, we're going to change it from white to black. I choose to use the Control-I, that's the easiest. And now, instead of painting with black, if I paint with black on black, it's not going to do anything at all. So what I want to do is swap the colors. So I want white to be the foreground. So I'm going to click on this little arrow thing. It's going to swap the colors. Now if I paint, it's going to reveal shards of what I have liquefied out here along the perimeter. So since these are kind of dispersed from the center out, it makes most sense to me to have the center of the brush positioned along the perimeter before I click. And then I also want to choose the shard size. So if this isn't spread out enough, I'll need to choose a different brush. Let's try this one here. That looks nice. So this could be for some of the larger chunks that are flying off. I'm going to click there to reveal those. So if it's too much, too large, or too clumped together, you may want to adjust your brush size and do, or use a different brush. So that was too much there for me, so I want to try a different brush pattern, something that's more spread out. So maybe this one has more space between the pieces here, and then you can reduce the size. And we could rotate it here. So these are the larger pieces that are flying off. Maybe some around the helmet here. And if you wanted to fill in some smaller pieces, you could with a different brush and a smaller size. So you get the idea and the effect. So you can only go out as far as you stretched. So if you have some pixels out here that you could use, you could have some little shards out here. But if you didn't stretch it out very far, then you're not going to be able to explode very far out. So this actually should be on the bottom so that it's hidden by the original. So I have some pieces out here that are part of the liquefy that shouldn't be. So I want to put that underneath the original Mahomes. So that's the effect that we're going for. I'm going to go ahead and enable the background layers. And from this point it'd be just adjusting to taste things that you either want to increase the intensity of, or reduce the intensity of, or change the way that it looks. In my opinion, this red background is too bright, and it could be this overlay, so I'm going to adjust that. And it's probably this red layer that I want to adjust to be darker. There we go. And because there's such a large logo, I'm going to actually stretch this red layer out to be a little bit larger so you can see more red along the perimeter. Something like that. And it doesn't have to be perfectly symmetrical. So I kind of like it that there's a little bit more red in one corner than there is in the other. Alright, so there's the finished product. Again, the most important thing is that you learn how to use the techniques that we covered in this lesson. Not necessarily that it comes out perfect, but that you understand the concepts involved in creating this. The background that we started with, we just alt click that. So we transformed this from just a regular image on the playing field to something very creative and sporty looking, with some of this glass shards technique along the edges.